Rowan Duff had been cutting fence line since first light, and the cold that morning was the kind that settled into your hands and stayed there. He was 52 years old, broad through the shoulders, with the deliberate movements of a man who had learned long ago that hurrying rarely helped anything. His hair had gone mostly gray at the temples. His face was weathered in the way of men who spend their lives outside. Not roughened exactly, but marked the way good leather gets marked. He ran a modest cattle operation in the foothills west of Pincher Creek, Alberta, a place he had built over 23 years out of stubbornness and patience and the particular attachment to land that grows in a man when he has worked it long enough that it starts to feel like an extension of himself. He was not a lonely man. That is important to say. There is a difference between a man who is lonely and a man who is alone, and Rowan Duff had understood that difference for long enough that he no longer confused the two. His wife, Janet, had died 11 years ago. Cancer, quiet and quick at the end, though the years before the end had been neither. He had grieved properly and at length, and then he had gone back to the fence lines and the cattle and the work. Because that is what you do when the land is yours and the animals need feeding regardless of what has happened to you personally. He had 3 sections of the north fence to repair before November turned the ground too hard to drive posts. That was what he was thinking about when he came over the low ridge and saw the truck. It was sitting at an angle on the lease road that cut through the corner of his property, not parked, but stopped in the way that vehicles stop when something has gone wrong with them. A green pickup, older, with a cracked taillight and a tarp over something in the box that had come half loose in the wind. The driver's door was open. A woman was standing beside it looking at the rear tire, which was flat in the particular collapsed way that suggested it had been flat for some time, and she had driven on it anyway. Rowan pulled his truck up behind her and stepped out. She looked up. She was young. He registered that first, the way you register weather before you register anything specific about it. Perhaps 27, perhaps a year either side. Dark red hair pulled back with a kind of impatience, as though the pulling back had been done quickly and with other things on her mind. She wore a canvas work jacket that was too big for her and work boots that were not. Her face was tired in a way that was different from simply not having slept. It was the specific tiredness of someone who has been managing something difficult for a long time without enough help. She looked at him with the direct, measuring quality of someone who has learned to assess people quickly, and she said, "I know. I drove it too far." "You did," Rowan said, not unkindly. "I didn't want to stop before the junction." She looked back at the tire. "I thought I could make it." "Where were you heading?" She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment something shifted in her face, a careful closing of a door she had been about to open. "Somewhere I'm not sure I should be going," she said, which was a strange thing to say to a stranger on a lease road, and which told him something. He looked at her truck. He looked at the tarp in the box, which was covering what was clearly a load of boxes and bags, the contents of a life being moved. He looked at her hands, which were cold and gripping each other in the way of hands that have been cold for a while and have no solution for it. "I have a spare," he said, "and a jack that works. It'll take 20 minutes." She looked at him. He could see her calculating the particular calculation a woman does when a stranger offers help on an empty road, the weighing of risk against need. "My name is Rowan Duff," he said. "I've got 320 head of cattle on the section south of here and a fence that's been irritating me since October. I'm not interesting enough to be dangerous." Something in her face relaxed, just slightly. "Sylvia Crane," she said. "I'm 27. From Lethbridge." He got the jack. He learned her situation in pieces, the way you learn most things of consequence. Not all at once, but in the gaps between other conversation, in the small admissions that come when someone is watching you work and does not feel required to perform normalcy. Her name was Sylvia Crane, and she was 27. and she had been living for the past 3 years in a house in Lethbridge that belonged to her mother's second husband, a man named Brent Fowler, who was 58, and who had married her mother when Sylvia was 19, and who had treated the marriage from the beginning as a transaction that entitled him to opinions about how the women in the house conducted themselves. Her mother, Louise, was 51, small and bright-eyed, and genuinely in love with Brent in the way of women who have mistaken authority for security. Louise did not see what Sylvia saw. That was not unusual. It is one of the harder truths about that particular situation, that the person closest to it is often the last to see it clearly. Sylvia had been helping on the property, doing the books for Brent's small excavating business, managing the household accounts, because she was good with numbers, and because in the beginning it had felt like contributing, and later it had felt like something else. She had been trying to save enough money to rent her own place for 2 years. Brent controlled the household finances with the casual thoroughness of a man who does not think of it as control, but as management. Her wages had come partly in cash and partly in the form of room and board deducted before she ever saw the money, and the remainder was rarely what they had agreed. 3 days ago, Brent Fowler had told her that a man he knew, a business associate, he said, as though the word made it formal, was interested in hiring her. The man was 61 and ran a property outside of Claresholm and needed someone to manage his household. "Live in," Brent said, and he had said it with the particular satisfaction of a man delivering a solution. Sylvia had said no. She had said it quietly and clearly in the way she said things, without drama but without any space in it for negotiation. She had said, "I am not a position to be filled. I am a person." Brent had not taken that well. The scene that followed had been loud enough that the neighbors, the Paskovich family, who had a semi on the other side of the fence, had come to the back window to look. Loud enough that Sylvia's mother had stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded across herself in the way of a person who has decided not to see what is in front of her. Loud enough that Sylvia had gone upstairs, gotten her things, put them in the truck, and left before Brent's voice had fully finished. She had been driving west with no particular destination when the tire gave out on Rowan's lease road. "You have somewhere to go?" Rowan said, fitting the spare. "I have an aunt in Cranbrook," Sylvia said. "She said I could come. I haven't talked to her in 4 years, but she said it." He looked at her. "That's a long drive." "I'm aware. Roads over the pass are going to ice overnight." She knew that too. He could see that she knew it. She had just not been able to stay where she was long enough to plan around it. Now I want to pause here for a moment, if you'll allow me. If you're listening to this story from somewhere in Canada, perhaps Ontario, perhaps British Columbia, perhaps out on the prairies, where the wind comes through without anything to stop it, leave a comment below and tell me where you are. And if this story is touching something in you, something you recognize, give it a like. It helps more than you know. It lets me keep telling stories like this one. Because this is the kind of story that matters. Not because it is dramatic, though it is, but because it is ordinary in the specific way that the truest things are ordinary. A woman on a road with her life in the back of a truck. A man who could have kept driving. He did not keep driving. Rowan Duff had a guest room that his sister used when she came from Tabor at Christmas. It had a good bed and a window that looked out on the foothills and a small lamp on the table that made the room feel, in his sister's words, like a place a person could actually rest. He offered it. He offered it the way he offered things, directly, without elaboration, with no particular expectation of outcome. He said, "The roads over the Crow's Nest are going to be ice by 10 o'clock tonight. I have a room. You can leave in the morning when there's light and the temperatures come up. It is no trouble." Sylvia looked at him for a long moment. "You don't know me," she said. "I know you drove on a flat tire for 2 kilometers because you didn't feel safe stopping sooner," he said. "That tells me enough." She came inside. The house was the kind of house that is made by one person living in it honestly for many years. Not decorated, not neglected, but settled. A kitchen with a cast iron pan on the stove and dried herbs hanging from a hook by the window. A sitting room with a wood stove and 2 chairs that had been positioned over time into exactly the right relationship to each other and to the fire. Books on a shelf that had been read, not displayed. A dog, an old black lab named Tuck, who came to inspect Sylvia with the unhurried authority of a dog who has decided he is the reasonable one in any situation and who concluded, after 30 seconds, that she was acceptable. She sat at the kitchen table while he made tea, and she said nothing for a few minutes, which was fine. He did not fill silence for its own sake. "This is a good house," she said eventually. "It's taken a while to get it there," he said. "How long have you been here?" 23 years on this property, he said. 11 of them on my own." She looked at him, and he could see her doing the arithmetic. "Your wife?" she said. "Janet," he said. 11 years ago." He handed her the tea. "It gets easier, people tell you. What they mean is that it gets different. The shape of it changes." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I'm sorry." "So am I," he said. "But the ranch is still here. The cattle are still here. You have to keep going." She nodded. He could see that she understood this in a way that was not theoretical. She told him the rest of it that evening, sitting by the wood stove with Tuck at her feet, the wind doing what November wind does in the foothills, pressing against the windows with a kind of insistence, reminding you that warmth is not a given. She told him about the books she had been keeping for Brent Fowler for 3 years, and how she had noticed in the last year that certain numbers did not add up in ways that could be explained by ordinary error. She told him about the conversation she had tried to have with her mother, who had listened and then said that Sylvia had always been suspicious of Brent, and maybe that was the real issue. She told him about the man in Clara's home and about Brent's face when he said it, the particular satisfaction in it. She did not cry while she told him this. She was 27, and she had the specific self-possession of someone who has spent a long time in a house where strong feeling had consequences, and who has learned to keep what matters most in a place where it cannot be easily reached. But her hands tightened around the mug, and once, just once, when she described standing in the kitchen doorway watching her mother choose not to see, her voice went quiet in a way that was louder than anything else she said. Rowan sat with all of it. He did not offer opinions on Brent Fowler because she had not asked for his opinions and because some things are better witnessed than commented upon. What he said when she was finished was, "What do you want to do? Not what should you do? Not what I think you ought to do. What do you want?" She looked at him. "I want to be somewhere I'm not managed," she said. "I want to do work that's mine. I want to know what my own money feels like." "Those are reasonable things," he said. "I'm aware," she said, and there was something dry in it that made him almost smile. He had a problem he had not been able to solve. This is relevant to the story, though it takes a moment to explain. The problem was his books. Rowan Duff was a competent rancher and a capable man and completely unable to manage a financial spreadsheet in any way that did not end with him staring at the screen with the expression of a person who suspects the machine is doing something dishonest. His accountant in Pincher Creek, a man named Gordon Lease, drove out twice a year to untangle whatever Rowan had done in the intervening 6 months and charged him accordingly, and with the quiet sympathy of a professional who has seen this before. He mentioned this, not strategically. He was not a strategic person. He mentioned it because they were talking about work, and the books were work, and it was on his mind. Sylvia looked at him. "What kind of operation?" he told her. 320 head. 2 hired hands, seasonal, hay contracts. The cattle sales twice a year, the lease arrangements on the north sections. She asked 3 questions, specific questions, the kind that come from someone who knows what the actual complications are in that kind of operation, and he answered them. "That's not complicated," she said. "Gordon Lees disagrees with you. Gordon Lees is being paid to disagree with me." A pause. "I could look at what you have, if you want." He looked at her. "You don't have to earn the room," he said. "That's not what this is." "I know," she said. "I want to look at it because it's interesting to me, not because I owe you something." He went and got the folder. She worked for 2 hours at his kitchen table, moving through his records with the focused quiet of someone who finds this genuinely satisfying in the way that other people find a good walk or a solved puzzle satisfying. Tuck moved from the stove to under the table and back to the stove, as he did when he was uncertain about the evening's schedule. Rowan made soup from what was in the refrigerator and brought her a bowl, and she ate without looking up. When she was done, she said, "You're paying too much for your hay contracts. You've got a verbal arrangement with the Lecombe outfit that isn't written anywhere, which means if their managed changes, you have no recourse. And you've been calculating your depreciation on the equipment wrong for at least 4 years, which means you've been overpaying tax." He looked at her. "Not by a catastrophic amount," she said, "but by enough." "Gordon Lees." "I know," she said. "It's the kind of thing that's easy to miss if you're seeing someone's books twice a year." He sat down across from her. He was 52 years old, and he was looking at a 27-year-old woman who had arrived on his property 3 hours ago with a flat tire and a truck full of her life, and who had just found 4 years of accumulated error in 45 minutes. "Stay," he said, "not in the guest room indefinitely. There is a cabin at the north end of the property, past the second creek. It's small, but it's weather-tight, and it has a wood stove and running water. My hand Len used it before he built a place in town. It's been sitting empty for 2 years. She looked at him. "You would manage the books for the operation," he said. "Properly, with a written arrangement and a wage that is what we agree it is, not what someone decides it is after the fact. In return, you have the cabin and the wage and the use of the north pasture truck for your own travel." She was quiet. "That is everything on the table," he said. "I am not a man who puts things under the table. There is nothing else to it other than what I said." She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He was not in a hurry, and he was not afraid of being looked at carefully. "Why?" she said. "Because you're capable," he said, "and you need somewhere that isn't managed by someone else. And because the books are genuinely a problem." He paused. "And because Tuck likes you, which I've learned to take seriously." The dog, hearing his name, lifted his head and then laid it back down. Something in Sylvia's face did something complicated. Not tears. She was not going to cry, he understood that about her already. But something that was the internal equivalent of a long-held breath finally released. "I'll stay until spring," she said, "and we'll see." "That's enough," he said. She stayed past spring. She stayed through the freeze-up, and through the long Alberta winter, and through the mud of April, and through the first dry warmth of May. And what she found on that property in those months was something she had not expected to find. Because she had not known it was something she was looking for. She found out what her own work felt like. She restructured Rowan's hay contracts and got them in writing and saved him enough on the Lecombe arrangement to cover what she would have paid 4 months' rent in Lethbridge. She found the depreciation error, went back 4 years, and filed an amendment that resulted in a refund from Revenue Canada that Rowan received in February with the expression of a man who has been told something he doesn't quite believe yet. She did these things, and they were hers, not because someone had permitted her to do them, but because she had the skills and the scope and the clear written agreement that said this was her work, and she would be paid what they had agreed. She planted a garden behind the cabin in April, a real one, laid out with the same methodical precision she brought to the spreadsheets. Potatoes and carrots, and an optimistic row of tomatoes that she knew were a gamble this far north, but attempted anyway. She drove into Pincher Creek twice a week and became, in the gradual way of small towns, known. The woman at the ranch west of town. Does Duff's books. Knows what she's talking about. Two of the other operations in the area asked her, by summer, if she would take on their accounts as well. She said yes. She negotiated the rates herself. The cabin was small and weather-tight as advertised, and in the evenings when the work was done, she sat by the wood stove with a book, or with nothing, simply with the particular quality of quiet that is different from loneliness. That is, in fact, the opposite of loneliness, the sound of a life that belongs to you. Rowan Duff came to the cabin for supper on Thursdays, because on Thursdays he made a point of not working through the evening, and because Sylvia cooked in the direct, capable way she did everything, and had begun making enough for two without being asked. They talked about the operation, and about the cattle and about books, because it turned out they both read, which is not something you always know about a person until you've known them for a while. He was 52, she was 27. The distance between those numbers was real, and neither of them pretended otherwise, and neither of them decided it was the most important thing about the situation. She told him once, on a Thursday in March, about the books she had kept for Brent Fowler. All of it, the numbers that didn't add up, the specific way that certain payments had been routed. She told him with the calm precision of someone who has been thinking about something long enough to have organized it clearly. Rowan listened to all of it. "Have you kept records?" he said. "I kept copies," she said. "I kept everything. There is a lawyer in Lethbridge who does nothing but this kind of case," he said. "A woman named, I will get you her name. She helped a man I know." Sylvia looked at him. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to," he said. "That is not the question." She took the name. She made the appointment herself. She drove to Lethbridge in the mud of April and came back with the expression of someone who has set something in motion that is going to take time, but that is in motion now, and that is enough. Her mother called twice. Sylvia answered once at the beginning and listened and said, "I hope you are all right, Mum. I mean that. But what happened in that house was not all right, and I am not going to pretend it was, and I think some time and some distance is what we both need." She said it without heat and without drama, in the tone of someone who has decided exactly what she thinks and is at peace with it. Her mother did not call again for 2 months. When she did, the conversation was different. Shorter and more honest, which is sometimes the same thing. Rowan watched all of this from a considered distance. He was 52. He had been in the foothills long enough to know that you do not rush what is growing in the right conditions. You clear the ground, you put in the posts, you keep the fence line true, you let the seasons do what seasons do. He had been alone for 11 years, and he was discovering that he was not any longer. He asked her on a September evening, the two of them at the fence line of the south pasture, the sky doing what Alberta skies do in September. Going through every color between amber and dark blue, in a way that makes you stop what you're doing without deciding to. He was 52, and she was 27. And he said what he meant without preamble because that was the only way he knew how to say things. "I love you," he said. "I know the numbers. I know how it looks from the outside. I am not asking you to ignore any of that. I am asking if what is here between us is something you want to build into something permanent." She looked at the sky. She looked at the pasture, at the cattle grazing in the low light, at the cabin visible past the second creek, at the garden behind it that had produced, against the odds, 3 decent tomatoes and an enormous quantity of carrots. She looked at Rowan, at his 52-year-old face that had been made by honest work and by grief, and by getting up every morning regardless, and she thought about a green truck on a lease road and a flat tire and a man who had stopped when he could have kept driving. "I want that," she said. They were married the following June, in the manner of practical people who have decided, a small ceremony in the yard. the hired hands and a neighbor family, and Rowan's sister from Tabor and Sylvia's aunt from Cranbrook, who had never met Rowan but approved of him immediately because, as she said to Sylvia, he has the kind of face that doesn't need to tell you it's honest. Sylvia wore a dress she had chosen in Pincher Creek with her own money and her own time, standing in the shop for 40 minutes until she found the right one, which was green, which was her color, which no one had said to her before but which she had always known. Rowan looked at her in it. He thought about a canvas work jacket too big for her on a cold November morning and what the distance between that and this represented. He knew exactly what it represented. And now, friends, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. If you've stayed with this story all the way through, if you're still here, listening, wherever you are in this wide country or beyond it, thank you. That means something to me. Rowan Duff was not a man who made grand gestures. He didn't ride in with a gun or make speeches. He stopped on a road. He made tea. He told the truth. He gave a woman a cabin and a written agreement and the room to figure out what she was. Sometimes that is the whole of it. Sometimes that is everything. If this story found you tonight, I hope you find someone who stops when they could keep riding, and I hope you are, yourself, the kind of person who stops. God bless you, friends. Keep riding, but know when to pull over.